Good evening. My name is Gary Cunningham, and I'd like to thank Enid for asking me to share some of my family's history. And it's always with you. So the sharing is, I think, a very important part of this. So I'm going to tell you a story of the Cunninghams when they originated from Glasgow, Scotland to Elk Lake. Now, that's a bit of a long space, but we'll kind of narrow the gap as we go along. My great-grandparents came from Scotland and first settled in Ottawa in the early 1800s. Charteris George Cunningham, my grandfather, was born in 1864 in Ottawa. And the names of Charteris maybe are maybe a little bit of a new name for some of you. You will hear repetitive names in this presentation. He grew up in Ottawa and apprenticed as an electrician, specializing in power stations. Now, if you are familiar with power stations in the early days living in the peninsula or on the peninsula, there was one out at Brentwood and Souk and Jordan River, and they were quite popular, obviously, for electrical things, electricity. In the 1880s, he worked in eastern Canada on installations, and from there he worked from coast to coast, right to Boston, Massachusetts, to San Francisco, California, and then up to Victoria, BC. Now, what I have with me tonight is some letters of recommendation from his employers. Now, these particular letters are quite unique because they date September the 6th, 1891. And this one was from a company in Boston, Massachusetts. And this other particular one that I have here, and I'd be more than happy to show them possibly during the presentation as we move around. This was from a firm in Ottawa. And I was quite taken by some of the wording in here. He said he was a very shady character, but a very reliable young man. Now, it takes a minute to read these because they're all done in the old pen and ink, but quite different and quite interesting, I hope. Of course, the gold rush fever was happening at the same time all along the coast from California to the Yukon. He traveled up to the Yukon with a friend and for a time, but we didn't really know how successful he was. He then moved to Calgary, Alberta, and married Lily Lindsay in 1883 and had 3 children, the youngest being my father. Of course, with tenders being let for the new legislative buildings in Victoria, he moved to Victoria and formed his own lighting company called Cunningham and Hinton. They were awarded the contract to install outside lighting on the first, second, and third phases of the legislative buildings that Mr. Rattenbury had designed. And it was Mr. Rattenbury's very first major architectural undertaking in Victoria. And of course, being Victorians, you know, he also was involved with the Empress Hotel. He also was involved with the CPR terminal and many other buildings throughout Greater Victoria. The thing that's quite interesting about my grandfather, at least as far as we were concerned, was that the lights that he installed with his company installed on the outside of the domes were only temporary. I didn't realize that they weren't a permanent installation. But that was the Jubilee, the Golden Jubilee for British Columbia. The bulbs that they put on the first time were a very special carbon filament. They didn't replace any of them until the 1950s. So, you know, they can build a better light bulb. My dad had a couple of them. As kids, you know, they're light bulbs. Big deal. We kind of never thought much of them and honestly don't know where they went or where they disappeared, but that's what we dealt with. Now, in this book here, this is a book I got out of Butchard's Gardens, and it says the British Columbia Parliament buildings. Now, inside the book, which was very interesting to me, was that they listed many of the contractors and many of the builders and all the credits. And in this particular setting, it says the lighting contractor was Cunningham and Hinton. The same contractor carried out temporary exterior lighting schemes in 1897 for the Jubilee year. In 1901 for the first visit of the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall, and again in 1910 for the visit of Sir Wilfrid Laurier. Permanent existing lighting was installed in 1912 for the visit of the Duke of Connaught as Governor General Hinton. As Governor General. Hinton was again the contractor, and the cost of the installation was $11,712.17. Not a mere $130 that we were talking earlier. But that particular manual is available at the Gardens, which was the first time we really had any idea really what he did and how he achieved it. Of course, at the time he was living in James Bay at 224 Superior Street, which still exists today, and it's a B&B, and it's called a Young House. Now, this is the building, or pardon me, the home that my father and his father and mother lived in on Superior. If you go to town at any time, you can drive by. And my dad frequently did that when we were kids with the store. He was on one of his buying trips. He would, drive us around town and show us things and show us James Bay because that's where he lived. Now, things start to change. From there he moved to Elk Lake, purchasing the 5 acres of property on the corner of the East Saanich Road and Savory. Now, East Saanich Road, for the younger generation, is kind of a mystery. They don't know. I had a conversation with a young lady today in her 40s, and she said, because it was referring to her grandfather and my father, about their running and training, and she said, yes, they used to train by running up and down the Pat Bay Highway. And I started laughing, and I said, no, he couldn't do that because there wasn't a Pat Bay Highway in the 1930s. There was the East Saanich Road. And she was really puzzled. Really? And I said, well, we'll leave it for now. But that's exactly. But she said that at the time they would run from Deep Cove all the way to Dallas Road, training for track and field. Now, what I want to show you here is a very old photograph of the log cabin service station. That, of course, that was the whole reason for moving out to Elk Lake. For those that have been looking at an old map that I brought down, that particular map is the map that he used when he first started to decide whether or not where he was going to buy, and all the rest of it, what he was referring to with the Saanich Peninsula. And Lori, the gal that did the Prospect Lake Reflection book that just came out, and Ina said we bought one, which is really nice. She used that map, and it's got a couple of features in the book, so I like to kind of promote the book a little bit, but I think we've got that over there. The purchase price for the property that my grandfather bought at Elk Lake was $2,300, and it was 5 acres. Probably a little bit more money. Shirley tonight said to me that her parents bought some of the property off my father. My grandfather had passed at that time, and I think Shirley said her mother paid $75 for the property, 3/4 of an acre on just a little bit down on Savory. Of course, at there he built the log cabin service station from trees cut from the property, and a general store, and of course attached living quarters. And the trees were some of the largest trees apparently on the peninsula. I suppose mainly because of Elk Lake and the swamp area that's down in where the Patricia Bay Highway is located today. Now, I have a picture here of my grandmother, my father's mother, and of course there she is on the property with some friends, and there's some of the trees. Now on this property, as you can see, long and large trees, he was able to regain some of his costs with the sale of cordwood. Now cordwood is approximately 4 feet long, kind of like a split post. He would he'd split it up and deliver it to the Dominion Hotel in Victoria, and he got paid a whopping $1.25. And they would stack it up between the back of the hotel and the Catholic Church on Blanchard. And of course, at that time, when he opened the service station in 1923, he was selling Imperial oil products and had a one-handed gas pump. Now, I'm sure some of you here remember a one-handed pump gas. Well, the workings of a gas pump, Darrell Foster's family was very much involved with gas pumps and automobiles. The gas pump, very simply, had a handle on the side of it, a glass bowl at the top, and you just pumped up the 10 to 12 gallons, whatever it would take. Once it reached it, it would kind of make a hissing sound at the top. And of course, when you had a customer come in, you'd take the handle off the pump, lift the gas cap, and follow the gasoline down. There was a metering rod on the side of the pump, on the side of the bowl, and you could see whether you had 1, 2, 3, or 4 or 5 gallons. But gas wasn't expensive in those days, approximately 8 cents a liter in 1923. But somebody said to me the other day, if gas was 8 cents a liter back in those days, it was very comparable to the money that was earned by the people that were working, as opposed to paying the money that we pay today for our gas. Now, if you're talking about old gas pumps and collectible gas pumps or memorabilia from service station, you're paying a lot of money. And if you're a fan of some of these shows that you see on television, like the Canadian Pickers, they're very much involved with getting that memorabilia, getting the Shell sign, getting the BA sign, whatever they can purchase, and that's a very, very popular show. As I say, the gas sold for 8 cents a liter, but we still complain, I suppose, about our gas costs. Of course, I never met my grandfather, but George Robinson Jr., Shirley's father, would often say, if he was talking to us, and he'd say to me, "I don't know if you really look like him, but you certainly walk like him." I didn't know that was a good or a bad compliment. That's what he said. That was on his walks, of course. They'd walk from Shirley's house down to the seed farm down on Brookley Road and passing my mother and father's service station. And years later, I finally met an electrician by chance. This is many years later. I was almost 30. I met this gentleman in Victoria at his home. He was 99 years old. He was losing some of his hearing. His sight wasn't the greatest, but his memory was unbelievable. I'd gone to town with Dave McDonald, and he had told me on the way to town, "Would you mind if I just dropped by this gentleman's house in Oak Bay?" It was situated right where the Oak Bay Rec Center is situated today. So we went inside, and he was sitting in a chair, and Dave said, "Well, I just want to find out if he's got enough pills, if the food's okay, and so on." So we kind of talked. I was introduced to him, and he didn't respond that much. But as we were about to leave, he said to Dave, "What was that fellow's name?" Dave goes, "What fella?" He's talking very loud because I say he was losing some of his hearing. "What was his name?" And Dave moved. "This guy?" Pointing to me. "That's Gary Cunningham." And he sat there for 20 seconds maybe. And he's a little puzzled. And Dave, "Well, what's wrong with that?" He goes, "Nothing. He said, my best friend, that was his last name, too." "Oh, really?" And Dave said, "Well, what did he do? Was he an electrician like you?" "Oh, yeah. He is a great electrician. Really smart guy." "Oh, okay. Well, what did you do?" "Well, we did all kinds of things. We traveled all over the place. We worked here and there. We went to the gold rush in California, went to the Yukon. And then he went back to Calgary or something, he said, and he got married, and then he decided to move west, and ended up working in Victoria. Then he bought some property, he built a service station, some old log cabin or something. Well, Dave's eyes just bugged out of his head, and he looked at me and he goes, this kid here is the grandson of the gentleman you're talking about." Well, needless to say, we were leaving, but we didn't get out of the house till probably 7 o'clock that night. He just filled my head with stories. He said, "I'm not going to say anything terribly wrong about your grandfather, whether or not you've heard anything." I said, "Well, rumors that he was he was a rogue," he said. So I said, wasn't quite sure what he meant by that, but in times to come, Dave found out a little bit more, and he was a bit of a shaker and a mover, but that was the gentleman that really had done many, many things with my grandfather, who I never met, by the way, as I said. So now, my grandfather, changed from Imperial Oil to Shell in 1928 at the same log cabin. He died in 1935, my grandfather, and my father was 26 at the time, and he had to take over running the log cabin general store and service station business. So now we're dealing with my father. Here we go again. Chartres Ramage Cunningham. Now, these names are kind of long and twisted, but I thought, Chartres Ramage Cunningham. Well, how far will they take this? We'll find out later. Now, Chuck attended, as I say, South Park School in James Bay. Of course, some of his classmates, especially two gentlemen, Lynn and Muzz Patrick, whose father was Lester Patrick of the hockey fame. And my dad used to use this story lots of times. Maybe you're not familiar with Lester Patrick, or you've seen the Lester Patrick division, the old Victoria Hockey Club that originated in Greater Victoria. So there's a lot of history there, but he had a great time with these two gentlemen, going to school, and certainly from in the later years through the times that they were involved with hockey in the United States and Eastern Canada. Of course, my father moved to Elk Lake, of course, in the 20s and attended Victoria High School. Being interested in track and field, he would often run to and from school just for the training. And as I say, I talked to this girl today, and her grandfather was Joe Addison, and he was part of the Flying Y team. He was one of the guys involved with the training, running from the northern part of the peninsula to Dallas Road, training on their own. His interest in track, of course, led him to the Victoria YMCA, my father. He was under the training of Archie McKinnon. I'm sure many of you have taken swimming lessons, possibly from Archie McKinnon. He was just one of the greatest guys, as my dad said, but he was more of a fatherly figure as well as his coach. I have a picture of the Flying Y, and I have many other pictures, obviously. The Flying Y members. These were the first group of Flying Y members, and my father's one of them. They had greats like Joe Addison and Bill Dale. Bill Dale you'll hear about a little bit more later. Owen Bentley, Ray Kersey, George and Frank Aldos, Bill Thompson, Chuck Copeland, and Chuck Cunningham. They all ran with the Victoria Flying Y. Chuck ran for 10 years and was a frequent BC 880 and 1 mile champion. Bill said he was well known for his big spurt at the end of near the end of the race, or as Bill or my dad would say, it's a kick. You practice this kick. And then I note here that Bill Dale said, "Don't let him lull you to sleep, because he will." He said it's all about strategy if you're running track and field, and my dad was very, very good at it. I have a trophy here that I'd like to show you. On the trophy, it's a petrol trophy. It's a Dr. Hall, and it's silver plate. When I got it back from my brother a couple days ago, and I couldn't recognize it. As you know, silver is horrible. Maybe that's why they don't use it, but it doesn't quite look like the trophies they hand out at functions today. Bit of plastic, normally. But if you look at the badges, I'm sure you will afterwards, it starts in 1930 and goes all the way up to 1935. And 5 of the badges say C. Cunningham. The last of them says William Dale or Bill Dale. Now, how this trophy ended up in my father's hand was quite, I think, a quite unique story. It's probably about 1975. I'll explain more about Bill in a moment, but Bill was going through his trophies as a very prominent runner, and he found this trophy, and he was quite impressed. He goes, thinking that, there's 5 Cunninghams on there and 1 me. It's not right. I was the last guy to win it. So he drove down, which he did frequently, drove down to the service station and said to Chuck, my father, "You may as well have this trophy because it really doesn't belong to me." And I thought that was kind of unique, and it was kind of a great way of showing his friendship to my father. Bill said, "Chuck is one of my best friends, and we are still Flying Y guys." My dad said, "We are the last of the Mohicans." I'm not sure what that actually meant, but that was one of their terms. This, of course, was a picture of my father, and this is kind of funny. These are copies, obviously. You can see I just gave it to him. I said, "What do you think of this?" I had it enlarged, and he just signed it. So that's why there's a signature on the bottom of it. Now, I'd also like to tell you about the Bud Mitchell story. I'm sure some of you folks here will know a lot about the Mitchell family. They're a group of guys that were involved with friendships and sports with my father on the peninsula. I was at a function about 25 years ago, and Bud was there, and he always comes along and talks. And he said to me, "Did your dad tell you that he was best man at your mom and dad's wedding?" And I said, "Yeah, I've seen your picture." "Yeah, I was. But I probably never told you the story about your dad asking me to accompany him to Vancouver. He was at the height of his running." And I said, "Well, why are we going to Vancouver?" "Well," he said, "I want you to come over to Hastings Park with me because he said, I don't have anybody to keep time on the race." And I said, "Well, you can get somebody there to keep time." He said, "No, I want you to do it." So they paid 50 cents to get on the CPR boat in downtown Victoria, sail all around the end of the island, under the bridge, down to downtown Vancouver. He said we stayed at the Vancouver hotel. We paid $1.50 a night at the hotel. It was a lot of money. And here I was with my stopwatch. So what your dad told me was, "Would you just go up and sit in the stands?" Now, Hastings Park was kind of a double thing. It had races for horses on the outside and a field track on the inside. The reason my dad wanted Bud there was to sit up in the stands. He was going to be in a race, and he wanted him to time how long it took him to go from a quarter pole, because the mile is marked off in quarters. So Bud thought, well, why is he doing this? Anyway, we came to Vancouver. I'm going to do that. The race was started. There was about 12, 14 people in the race, and it took off, Bud said, and I'm watching, and I click the watch on, and he gets to the first pole. I click it again. And I'm kind of watching the race. And my father is kind of getting behind a little bit. And they hit the second quarter pole, and he's getting further behind. We get to the third quarter pole, and he's going like, what's he doing? He's never going to win the race running that far behind. But he said it was quite amazing. The reason he wanted me to do all that timing was when he hit the quarter pole, he wanted to see how far he could let the other runners get before he caught them. And you can see this is what happened at the end. He passed everybody in the last quarter mile and beat them probably, 25, 30 feet, give or take. So he said, I never ever questioned about keeping time. As I said, I mentioned Bill Dale. Bill Dale was a protege of Archie McKinnon's. He was probably the best 880 man that had ever come out of Victoria. He won 2 back gold medals in the British Empire Games, attended the University of Washington, and also a very truthful friend to my father. But Bill's story about my dad was probably 10 years older than Bill, and if you're aware of track and field, it's for the younger generation. And my dad was very much involved with Bill and for him in his training when he was going to these major races throughout the country. And so what happened, there was a goodwill tour going on at McDonald Park out in James Bay. And that was to be my dad's last race. The goodwill tour also had a silver medalist at the 36 Olympics. And his name happened to be Glenn Cunningham. No relation. But he was 22 years of age. My dad was going on 34. The race went on. My dad came second, and Glenn came first. He was a silver medalist at the Olympics in 36. But after the race, when everybody's congratulating each other and kind of standing around in a bit of a circle, Bill said to my father, well, it was a great race, and you did really well racing against that gentleman. But the silver medalist came over and put his arm on all the guys, and he said, don't feel you're defeated here today, because if I hadn't known about you people, I probably wouldn't have won the race. And it had been quite embarrassing to be beaten by a 33-year-old man in Canada. But what happened, they came up on the boat from Seattle, and on their journey up from Seattle, they were sitting around a big table on the boat with their coach, and they were discussing strategies and who are they going to race against and how will it be and so on and so forth, which they do all the time. And what his coach said, he went down the list of runners and he said, oh, there's this guy, Cunningham, same name as you have. But be careful, don't take him for granted. He's an old man, but at the end of the race, he might beat you. So don't just go out there like it's a goodwill race and have a good time. And he said, if I hadn't been told that, he said to my father, you would have won and beaten me. And it was a little embarrassing to be beaten by a man 10 years older than me, at least. So that's the Bill Dale story. Somebody says, I sound like, my voice is like my mother's. It goes through walls. So that's kind of a nice thing. And for those that know my mother, probably quite true. I'm going to read this, and it's a little hard in some ways to actually understand what the word is, because it's handwriting and it's from Bill Dale, and this was a letter that was given to the family after my father had passed away. Okay, Chuck was BC half mile and also an 880 man in the late 1920s and half of the 30s. Joe Addison, the gentleman I mentioned earlier, was a quarter mile champion at the same time, and when I beat Chuck for the half mile, he concentrated on the mile. This Joe, Chuck, and myself were BC champs in the quarter mile, half mile, and mile runs. We also were close friends and enjoyed many years together. In 1936, we all attended the Olympic trials in Montreal. None of us got to go because of the lack of funding. Not because of the lack of ability, just the money. Travel to and from meets in those days was all self-supported, and sometimes with difficulty, but always was fun. Always, he said. We would go to Vancouver on the Friday night, midnight CPR boat. In those days, you could get a ride in the bunk area of the front of the boat, or really called the bullpen, for 50 cents. It was full of men, and we got beds close together, and when the noise of the bow crashing through the waves and radiated through the boat, we usually started snoring, and it was too long we were falling all fast asleep. Coming home on Saturday night, sometimes we got to sit up and tried to stay comfortable by pulling two armchairs together, and sleeping in this manner was some bit of a problem. Kind of like listening to old family movies. I'm watching them, I guess. But anyways, I'll get through this in a minute for you. This doesn't always work for us, because if you would fall asleep and stretch out and push the two chairs apart and end up on the floor. And in 1935, we went to a track meet in Kelowna, and Joe borrowed one of his uncle's touring cars. And as we took off, we traveled up and through the northern part of the United States to get to Kelowna, and we didn't realize it, but one of the radiator was leaking. So every time we crossed the stream, the one sitting on the front outside jumped out and filled up the radiator using a pail we had brought along for this purpose. This was the first meet in which I beat Chuck in the half mile, and he said, okay, from now on, you have the half mile and I'll concentrate on the mile. So Joe and Chuck helped me very much with my training, and from then on we were really fast friends. He said, pardon the pun. We had just crossed the lake on our way home when the rear end broke on the car, and the car stopped. The garage we were close by, we were able to push the car to the garage, and the gentleman who owned the garage said he would fix the car if we could cut all the wood that he had. It was all cottonwood. He said it was horrible. But that he had always stashed out beside his garage at home. We agreed to this, and Chuck, being a mechanic, helped repair the car. We slept around a fire on the shores of Lake Okanagan, and late the next day, the repairs were done, and we finished, and we took off, 6 of us, and Archie McKinnon, off our coach. We came home via Stevens Pass in the USA at about 4 a.m. in the morning. We ran out of gas in the mountains. As we had gone to Kelowna, that route that we knew, and we knew there's a gas station up ahead at about a couple of miles or so. So Joe, Chuck, and I went to see if we could get some gas. We got the gas, but the attendant, we didn't have any money. We had forgotten. We left the money with the coach, Archie, and he was still at the car. Chuck and I had to stay at the station as hostages while Joe went back to the car with the gas. Imagine Chuck and my surprise when the car came back along and drove right past the gas station. He drove about a mile or so before turning around and coming back for us. Joe had a little joke on us, so he had a great sense of humor. Another night on returning, we must have felt a night flushed, as we got a small stateroom on the boat, and the 6 of us slept in it. Fred Loeffler got the top bunk to himself because he had run a 26-mile marathon race that day. Chuck got the short bench under the porthole, and Archie slept on the floor. And Paul Rowland, Joe Addison, and myself shared the lower bunk. You can imagine how much sleep I got being the middle man in the lower bunk. Bill Dale. Now, 1 page to go. Chuck played basketball for the West Road Roadster team, or the West Road Hall. They played some of their games in the small hall at the upper part of Island View. Now, that Island View Hall is where the Lions meet. They played basketball in that hall, small hall. Bill was right. They weren't the most talented players in the world, but they sure had the sharpest elbows in the league. This was something that Chuck was adept at, not only in basketball, but also in track. He could establish his own space and defend it against all comers, whoever tried to crowd him. He was always firm but fair. Chuck and Gladys already had four sons when she was expecting the 5th child. The 4 small boys had looked forward to the arrival of the 5th boy so that they could have a basketball team. When Chuck took the 4 boys up to the hospital to see their new sibling, which happened to be a girl, the first thing one of the boys said was, "She sure buggered up the basketball team, didn't she?" Chuck used to say that he and I were the last of the Mohicans, and now he is gone. I will miss him forever, and he was a really good friend, Bill Dale. I had trouble reading that the other day. Okay, let's go to my mother. Wow, that's the statement, isn't it? That often is what people say. Was Gladys Cunningham your mother? And I said, yep, she was. For those that knew her and were kind of raised by her, many people were, that was quite a true statement. But she was born on a farm in 1917 in Winterburn, Alberta, very close to Edmonton. She was the one of five children. Her mother died when she was 12, and she was raised by her father and older brother, Percy. Uncle Percy, as we called him. Now, I'm going to stop with Uncle Percy for a minute, because he could tell stories. He was just the greatest storyteller. He set us up one time, and he told us that he'd cut his hand very badly, and he had to go to the emergency hospital for stitches. And while the surgeon was finishing up, Percy said to the doctor, "Will I be able to still play the violin?" And the surgeon said, "Of course you can. Probably better than you could before." "Oh," he said, "that's great," he says, "because I never could play it before." But I thought that was always a cool story. And of course, when he came out to visit, it was bedlam, because not only the stories, but I'd never heard anybody snore in my life. He'd wake up the whole house. Nobody could sleep but Percy. But that was my mother's brother. Of course, life on the farm was difficult, and when she was 19, Mother moved to Vancouver. And she worked for Woodward's department store. She came to Victoria and moved to the peninsula and worked on Charlie Whitten's berry farm. Charlie remembers Charlie Whitten. She could drive all the equipment and deliver the berries to the Saanich Fruit Growers Association on V&S Crossroads. And I'm sure most of you know what that is. It's still there, but not a berry farm, or a fruit shed anymore. Now, I'd like to show you this picture. That's my mother, if you can recognize that. Shirley, after we get done here, can come up. There's a building behind it. Jack remembers it's called the Garden House. And my grandfather built that thing as a service garage when he was just after he'd finished doing the log cabin. And then during the Depression, as everybody had trouble financially, he sold that particular building and property for $300. But that's my mother demonstrating tractors for the Mr. Pease, who at that time owned Toby Jug as well, and also dealt in farm equipment and diesel motors. Now, I'd like to show another picture of my mother. This is the basketball team she played for. And in the bottom picture is one I found yesterday in a bag of photos. The bottom picture is at Athletic Park. Now, what she's holding, which is kind of ironic, she's holding a silver tea service. If you know my mother, a silver tea service would be quite appropriate for her, but the Victoria Athletics baseball team had their fan appreciation night. So she packed us all in the car, old car, packed all the kids in. Okay, let's go. So we get to Athletic Park, no tickets. So all us kids are going, oh, we're all sports fans, baseball fans. We want to see this game. So all of a sudden, the guy sort of comes out of the crowd going, I have one ticket. And, of course, my mother, you got one ticket? She says, hang on. So she grabs a ticket from him, and the guy's looking at her. She goes up to the entry and said, I have one ticket, but I have 4 kids. Oh, come on in. That's it. So it was a sellout. So we sat down on the bottom. We couldn't get a seat. We sat on the stairs near the third base line. They drew the number for winning a tea service, and that's the winning tea service. So you just never know. The basketball pitcher, they played their games at the West Road Hall, and I have a story. If you could give me another. I'm not choking up. It's just that. Does everybody remember the West Road Hall? Nobody knows about it? No? West Road Hall. Okay, I'll tell you where and why I'm kind of setting you up for this. When my mother passed away, all the family kind of got together, and my dad had trouble boiling water, so we said, well, he's got to have food. So all the family took, sometimes you did a double, twice a week, and if not once a week, we'd all go down and we cooked supper for him. This particular day, I was coming down Benvenuto, and the stop sign was on, and the Butchard's Garden sign. A bunch of the guys are there working, and a couple of them I knew, and they're yelling at me, and what are you doing? And they'd pipe everywhere. Oh, he said, we're trying to drain the corner because it's always wet in the wintertime. How's it going? Not very good, he said. There's concrete everywhere. Every time we try to dig, we run into concrete. So I laughed, and I said, of course you run into concrete. How do you know that? Well, I know that. Do you put it there? No. It's where the West Road Hall used to be, right on that lawn. Oh, they didn't know. Had no idea. So anyways, I carried on. I was going down to make supper, and I made supper for my dad. And as usual, we'd sit around and talk. And I told him the story about these guys not knowing about the West Road Hall. And he starts laughing. I said, well, what's so funny? Well, he said, you were in that hall. Probably you were 8 or 9 days old. But you were in a carnation milk box. And you were passed around the West Road Hall to all the people that knew your mother. And they'd do that every kid, because it was really a tight community in those days, big time. And then he said, you would go to a basketball game, you pay 15 or 10 cents, I can't remember exactly. That would give you 3 basketball games to view, and after that you'd get a potluck supper and a dance. So that was the West Road Hall. So that's just a little story about that hall. I've got Gladys meets up with Madge from Scotland. Madge later marries Jack Wooten, Charlie's son. Madge and Gladys shared a 2-room shack on Wooten's Berry Farm. Now here we go, shacks. Now how many people remember shacks? They were everywhere on the peninsula, right? We all had something to do with a tar paper shack. I think Cutover Bay was built out of tar paper shacks. They had no modern conveniences. They had an outhouse, a screen cooler on the outside wall. I'll remember those. We all didn't have refrigerators when we were kids. And of course, a wood stove. Madge met Chuck at the grocery store and tells Gladys about a good-looking guy at the grocery store. The rest is history. Boy meets girl. They were married on August of 38 and had 6 children. Gary, the oldest, Jim, Alan, Stan, Barb, and Neil. Hey, what's it like growing up in a household with 6 kids, a grandmother and a service station and a general store? Not the norm. Not even close. In the years I remember, Sunday morning was a big day in the store. The neighborhood men would gather around the potbelly stove drinking coffee. They smoking cigars, and my mother could smoke cigars too, so she sometimes joined them, and swap stories. Of course, the best time was the World Series. Dad would take Cadbury chocolate boxes and open them up, tack them on the wall below the old radio and draw a score sheet and show me how to do the line scores as the game was going on. And some of the old-timers were Mr. Porter, who always said he was a judge and had his jail on his house on Brookley Road. We were scared, terribly scared of Mr. Porter. He wore a bowler hat, black hose, and a cane, and he'd go around and poke you like this, and you behave yourself or you're going to jail. Jack remembers being poked, I'm sure, by Mr. Porter. I'm not sure whether or not Jack delivered papers to Mr. Porter. I think he did. Was there a jail there? I don't know. No jail. That was one of the chaps that came around. Other guys were Ed and Hugh and Colin Campbell, George Robinson, Shirley's dad. Colin, of course, did everything the old way, totally the old way. The old general store had old oiled floors. Every time you go into a store, you see these little narrow pieces of fir wood. And of course, every Friday night, my dad and the kids would apply a new coat of oil and then cover it with the newspapers until it dried, getting it ready for Sunday. We sold ice cream from buckets on the soda fountain, cookies in the bulk bins. Excuse me. Everything was in bulk. And we as kids would always have to weigh it and package it up, whether it be rice, brown sugar, whatever. Bulk foods was not new. As we go to the bulk food section and today, not new. We learned about the bulk food section very quickly as youngsters doing our chores. This story might bring a bit of humor to somebody. It certainly didn't bring it to us. One day, because it was a general store, it sold a fair amount. It had quite a drug line. Not drugs as we relate to totally, but it was a country general store. One day we found some chocolate in the drug department, or we thought it was chocolate, and we started handing it out. We gave it out to Ken Polson and his sister Audrey. We gave it out to Rick Chaffee, Jim, Alan, my brothers, Russ Lucas. His mom at that time owned the Toby Jug. Kids were running home. Mothers were phoning. What did you feed those kids? I think it was X-Lax. It was X-Lax. We had overdosed on X-Lax. My mother phoned Dr. Gray in town and said, what do I do? Everybody's all excited. What do I do? It's okay, he said. They've taken so much X-Lax, it's kind of acted as an antidote. Of course, the thing was, you couldn't get near the bathroom. You couldn't get 10 feet from the house. It was an embarrassing situation. And of course, it wasn't my parents' fault. It was our fault. I think luckily that day Jack Mather wasn't playing with us. That was probably the best part. The store was also the neighborhood place where women brought their babies to be weighed, and this would be new babies. My dad would adjust the formula by a chart because he had the scale at the store. They also sold drugs and stovepipes, nuts and bolts, and my mother even sold Irish sweep tickets. They were illegal, so she had them in a paper bag under the counter. At the same time we were running the garage, Dad pumping gas, fixing cars. Mom held the record for repairing flat tires on old trucks and cars, while Dad's granny looked after the kids and the house. Customers used to run a tab at the store, and sometimes Dad got paid, sometimes he didn't. He certainly fed a lot of people who were living in shacks around the neighborhood. Many people have told me that the war years, during the war years, if it wasn't for my parents, they would have gone hungry. And if it wasn't for my mom and dad, they certainly would have. We used to deliver groceries in those days, and Shirley and I talked about grocery deliveries. Her husband, Bob, his parents had a grocery store in Brentwood. Rain or shine. Ed Gate, who owns GWG Rentals, always tells me the stories of, oh, remember your parents coming up, taking groceries up the hill on Central Saanich Road? And I'll always remember, if you have butter, the way to keep butter without refrigeration is to hang it in a bucket in a well. It would always last. So he said, I always try to tell people, if you got butter and you can't keep it, put it in a bucket, put it in a well. Of course, Dad would always open up any time of the night for stranded motors, and my dad and George Robinson would go around making sure no lights were seen coming from houses. During the war years, we all had dark green blinds, and cars had little covers on their headlights with slits in them so you could just see. Haven't seen some of those for a long time. I think George and Dad were called wardens or something. I'm not quite sure about that. I'm sure they were. After the war years, growing up with 6 kids, we had many stories. I mentioned Joe Addison. Joe Addison was a Victoria policeman, but he too was part of this Flying Y team. But apparently he was quite clumsy, as his granddaughter told me today on a telephone conversation. She said, funny, he said, one of our cousins is the same way. He had a chance to go to the trial in the Olympics, but fell in a pothole and knocked the hurdles over and placed 4th, so he couldn't go. My introduction to Joe, I don't remember, but Joe was a police officer on the motorcycle detail in Victoria in 1935, 36, 78. I was born in 39. My dad was coming out Quadra Street, because that's how you got out of town. You didn't have all these other roads. You came out Quadra Street and finally picked up East Saanich Road. And he was driving his old truck, my father, and he was pulled over in Quadra by Joe. What are you doing? Oh, I just came from the hospital. Got out of her baby yet? Yep, had a boy. Good, let's go see him. So he's follow me. So he turned his siren on and drove down right back to the Jubilee, walked right in the hospital to the maternity ward, wanted to see this new kid. Apparently, I'm told all these stories, went into the room and just picked me up and carried me up and down the hall and then took me back. That was Joe Addison. Of course, being kids at Elk Lake, we had a fort. Jack will probably remember our fort. Actually, an old chicken house. It's where the pump island's located. We decided to booby trap our fort. And what we did, we dug holes at the front of the door. We dug holes on the trail to the fort and covered them up with twigs and grass, filled them with water, and figured, if those kids come around, we've got them. The only one we got was our father. He missed all the traps going on the trail, but he went to open the door. Clunk, he went in. He lectured us how horrible we were to do that, because what would happen if he broke his ankle? Who would feed you? Who would work? Maybe some of you have had that, but we didn't do that anymore. We spent all our summers at Elk Lake from dawn to dark. We were swimming, fishing, and we'd often rent a boat from Mr. Mann on the corner of Cutover Bay Road next door to Shirley's place. Well, where Shirley lives now. Mr. Mann was quite a guy. Everything in his house was perfect, and he had these little rowboats that he would rent out for about, 15 cents if he felt like charging it. It was a great thing for us. We could row all over Elk Lake and do all our things. The story I'd like to tell you now is one that almost ended us up in big trouble with the police department. We didn't think anything of it. It concerns dealing with old telephone poles that the phone company had taken down and laid along the East Saanich Road. That day, we were told that we had to look after our little sister, Barb. She was about 2 at the time. Mom was busy, and I think she had to go to town, and there were just no babysitters. We were the babysitters. We'd already built a raft out of these telephone poles. We had it in our little beach. Hampshire wasn't all open like it is today with little tiny beaches everywhere. So we took her down in her buggy. It was a thistle buggy. We folded the roof down. There's my brother Jim and me. I don't think Jack was there this time. I'm going to leave him out of this one. So we didn't think anything of it. We spent all our time at the lake. We're always swimming. No problem there. We took her out to the beach, put her on the raft. Put the lock on. We were careful there. We locked the thistle buggy. It wasn't going anywhere. Then we shove off. We go punting around Elk Lake, down one way, down there. And then we come around Hampshire Beach. All these mothers are there with their children, screaming at us, screaming at us. Well, we had the harness on her too. What was going to go wrong? But anyways, we were brought ashore by the Saanich Police Department and wanted to know what we were doing. Somebody was a little excited about that. I don't know. We never thought, as I say, just one of those things. Of course, Jack and I went to this particular school on the old coach line buses, and Jack always used to say, Dad had wooden seats. And I said, yeah, well, they were neat buses. They had Vista Cruiser roofs. But great old buses. That's how Jack and I lived about 2 blocks apart, I would guess. His mother was in the hospital having Jack, and 6 days later, my mother was in the hospital having me. So they were both in the hospital at the same time. Jack and I had been not 100% close, but we always connect and do our tours every time he used to come down from Armstrong. We'd go for lunch, get in the car and say, okay, where are we going today? And we'd go around the neighborhood and talk about the old days, what we used to do. And we are the old days now. We also played, this is a little bit tricky, my wife and I were laughing about this and not wanting to know how this is going to go over. Jack and I always played cowboys and Indians with all the other kids. We all done that. And of course, he used to say, don't ever play cowboys and Indians with Cunningham. Not him. You'll surrender to him, and every time he had this old BB gun that wouldn't shoot BBs, but he'd put rice in it. So he'd tell you to stick them up, and then he'd shoot you with rice. Jack used to say, I used to stand on the edge of the bank spitting out rice going, I don't want to play with you anymore. You're not supposed to shoot me. I surrendered. But it was fun. We all did that. The story of my brother Alan, in the old house we had a central furnace heating, and my sister Barb was home. She was probably about 12 at the time, 13 maybe. And he had a light, was told to go light the furnace. He was reluctant to do it, but okay, Dad said go light the furnace. So he's lighting the fire, and it won't work. So what he does, thinks, I know gasoline might work. So he goes to the shed and gets a can of, not a big can, thankful for that, of white gas. And he's already trying to light this thing. So he opens the door, flings the gas in the... Needless to say, you know what happened next. He was blown backwards into the bank, which is probably about 12 to 10 feet away, wondering what hit him. My sister was standing on the grate above the furnace. The charge went straight up, blew all the windows out of the house on the one side, singed her slippers, singed the cat that she was standing beside, and that wasn't a good thing. But nobody was really hurt. Well, my dad was most upset, though, that he was that stupid and the fact that it knocked all the windows out of the house. But that's what happened. And I'm not going to leave Russ Lucas out of this picture either. It's the same furnace. He came into the house one day, and he always wore Blakey's on his boots. I'm sure you're familiar with Blakey's on your boots. And he just ran over and jumped up in the air, boom, on the top of this grate. And I was turned the other way. When I looked around, he's up to his armpits in the furnace. Very embarrassed. He had to go buy a new grate. We got it all repaired before my father found out. But that worked. Gary learning to swim. I would just ask this question at the book signing over at Tina's Cafe that night with Doug and Pat Gate. Doug said to me, I heard a story about you the other day, and I go, well, what now? He said, is it true that your mother just took you down to Elk Lake and threw you in when you were just a baby? And I said, close, but not quite. I was probably 15 months old when I was kind of tossed into Elk Lake, but that wasn't uncommon. They would go down to Elk Lake to get water for doing clothes, washing clothes. They'd take old cars in those days and cut the backs off, put wash tubs in, and back in the lake, they'd bucket the water in it. And at Hamsterley, they had a really nice raft with a diving board. And I used to run out, apparently, to the diving board and stand here like this. And, okay, so they just dunked me a few times, and then pretty soon threw me in. I was probably 15 months old, but I didn't drown. I didn't sink. And I quite enjoyed swimming. Actually swam in those old Beaver Lake, Elk Lake swims we used to have in the 50s. Remember those? Used to run all the way over to Sadler's at their little, and never won anything, but I finished every time, trained every night. It was ridiculous. And the Butler family, Steve and Sharon Butler, last year said, we found an old paper, and they talk about the Elk Lake, Beaver Lake swimming. Your name's in there. What are you doing in there? I said, well, I used to swim in it. Oh, I didn't think you could swim that far. I said, well, if you practice, you can swim that far. Of course, Elk Lake stories, we can't leave out this. And, of course, Shirley Robinson was, she was actually a big sister to all us little monster Cunninghams. Isn't it? Yeah. I didn't mean to leave you in the middle of that. But Shirley was our neighbor, and a little bit older than that. That's not a lot. 4 years. 4 years. So she would come and look after us, and she didn't remind me of the story, but was commenting on the story how when she was 4, came to my mother's place when I guess I was born, and she wanted to see me because she'd never seen a baby before. So she was down looking at me in a crib, and it was a blue crib, he said. So, but Shirley is just a fantastic gal. She had a great dog by the name of Tubby. She used to dress him up all the time, sunglasses, a hat, scarf, take all kinds of pictures of him. He was just a super dog. He had a bit of a problem one day. The Elk Lake froze over, and all his kids and Cliff Campbell and Shirley and all of us were down at the lake, and Tubby ventured out with another dog on the lake, and it wasn't very heavy. The ice wasn't very heavy, and splash, both dogs fell in. Cliff Campbell decided, I can do that, so he's going up. Yeah, So Cliff went in and fell in himself, and then, of course, the panic, everybody's going crazy. We finally got them out with ladders, but he was pounding the ice, but it was a bit of a scary thing. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody that's fallen into the ice and you can't do anything about it. But Shirley was more recognized for her Sunday school that she started in her playhouse behind the house that they lived in. It's a cool little playhouse. I always remember the red window in the back. And Jack was there, and my brothers were there. I think Ken and Audrey Polson were there. I don't know if Rick Chaffee, Charlie McCory, they were there. So we were all Shirley's little Sunday school. And, of course, it eventually went up to Bainbridge up on Brookley Road, or Old Lily Road, pardon me, and then down to the church on the highway. They used to call it the basement church, I believe. The cellar? The root cellar, right. I think, were you the first? I think Shirley was the first couple to get married there. Yeah, when it was built. So, lots of great memories with Shirley Robinson. Of course, the service station in 1950 moved to the Pappy Highway. My parents were both running the service station and the general store. Mom worked alongside Dad, pumping gas and doing oil and lubes. Sorry about my voice tonight. I think she'd rather be doing that than cooking or cleaning. And we all know that. We don't want to beat that up too much. Her cooking wasn't exactly the best, but we all survived. Other people didn't do well with my mother. She wasn't afraid of anybody. Nobody. Bill Maddock phoned one morning, Sunday morning. Bill Maddock was well known in the area, and especially for his gambling games along with the other high rollers in the Victoria area. And I don't want to name a lot of them because probably not here anymore, but there was major gambling going on with one-armed bandits and poker and so on. Anyway, she got a call. Dad answered the phone, and Bill said, somebody's got a flat down here. Could somebody come down and fix it? Could Glad come and fix it? So Mother was asleep, so Dad woke her up and said, Bill wants to know if you can do a flat, fix it. Yeah, okay, or change the tire. So, okay, so she gets up, goes down to the service station, 2 in the morning. My mother can drive a tow truck. Loaded the jack on the truck and headed to Maddox's farm. She said you couldn't see in the room for smoke, but you could see that there's a round table. All these guys are playing cards and drinking and having a great time. Asked for the keys for the car and went out, jacked the car up, took the spare out, put it all together. Probably took her half an hour. In the night, went back in, and Bill knew my mother quite well, and he said, would you like a drink? Sure. My mother could drink with the best of them. And as I said, smoke cigars, black or white owls, and no problem. Not to deviate from the story too much, but she trained a lot of people, young men especially, not to smoke by sitting them down when they were at a very young age, when they wanted to smoke, and said, okay, we'll smoke a cigar. If you can smoke a cigar with me, then you can smoke cigarettes. Not too many survived. They gave up quickly. A white owl cigar is not the best. You have to be a seasoned cigar smoker. So when she returned to the inside the Maddock after having her drink, she was about to go home, and she just said, Bill said to her, what do we owe you for that repair? And there's silence because somebody said money. Silent. So she just said, oh, I don't know, $5 would be okay. Well, there's a big uproar from, I'm not going to tell you who he was, but we've all known him. How outrageous it was to charge $5 to change a tire, come all the way, and he just was screaming and yelling that being a ripoff. Well, I'm sure, and as my mother said, she changed the color of the room by what she could say back to him. But she just walked over to the table where all the money was, and she said, no, the money that I'm going to get for this repair is what I'm going to take. And she said she just went like this and pulled money to her and stuffed every pocket she had. And she told them, any one of you guys that wants to get this money back from me, we were wearing a tire iron around your neck. Nobody moved. She left, got home, counted over $300 to change the tire. So, as they say, don't, if she says $5, pay it. Don't make a big scene out of it. And I'm sure she would have hit him with the tire iron. She could drive the tow truck. Happened to me and my wife, actually. I wasn't even dating. I was going going with the guys to a party in Brentwood. And we went to town to pick all these girls up that went to Squeak High, and we were coming out through Cutover Bay, and the car quits. Great big old Chrysler Royal. And I said, no problem. I'll just go up to the corner and phone my mother. And they're all looking, what are you going to phone your mother for? She comes picks up. So 10 minutes later, this tow truck comes bounding down Cutover Bay Road, turns around and backs up, and it's my mother. And his nose are hanging open from all these girls. Who is this? Well, that's his mother. She drives the tow truck. Get in the truck, get in the car, whatever. And she pushed us all the way up to the garage. And then I took my dad's car and took everybody to the party. That's the first time I actually met my wife, Joan. But, she could and often drove the tow truck. They also did service work for McIntyre and Harding. Now, that's a gravel company that was on the edge of Cutover Bay Road and Fowler. Quite a group of people. Mom would take her pickup, whatever she had. She'd drive down to the gravel pit and pick up a truck, bring it up to the service station. Mom and Dad would do an oil and lube on it. She'd take it back. They did that every Saturday. Oil and lube 8 to 10 trucks or more or less. This particular day, she had taken the second truck back, and she looked in the big old garages they had, and she could see the guys in there working on a truck, an old Hayes. So she casually walked in before she took the next truck and said, what are you doing, Joe? Joe said, oh, never mind. He said, just get the truck. Just go away. We're busy. We're trying to fix this truck. So she left. After the fourth truck, they're still in there. Fifth truck, they're still in there. So she goes in, what are you doing? Oh, damn it. He said, if you got to know, he says, take a look. Well, what's wrong? Look in the bottom of the transmission case. There's a gear that's broken in there. Because of all the gears in there, we can't get a magnet. We can't get we can't get it out of there. Oh, is that all it is? She said. So she was a really small person. So she just rolled up her sleeve, had very small hands. She reached all the way down, laid on her stomach on the floor of the truck, reached all the way down to the bottom of the transmission, picked up the broken gear, turned around to Joe, is this what you want? Now apologize. Because he'd said some nasty things, which she asked him a couple of questions, what he was having problems getting the gear out. And just another story with her and mechanics. Of course, the one that in later years that would disturb a lot of motorists on the Pathway Highway was my father crossing the road. Now, a lot of times I'd get a phone call and they'd say, Gary, tell your dad to go up to the stoplight. He's going to get hit with coming across. Well, I know he just runs to the island, and then when the traffic light changes or there's no cars, he runs the rest of it. You can't do it now, but that's what he would do. And so I'd go and see him, and I'd say, hey, somebody else called, and they don't want you to cross where you're doing it. They want you to go to the light. And all he would say to me is, how many people have been killed crossing at that light? I said, no other questions. Lots of people were killed, thought they had the right of way crossing at that light. But as he said, in later years, when he was in his latter part of his 80s, he was really frustrated because he had to go to the light. He had a cane, and he said, I could run like the wind at one time. Now I'm in my 80s. I can't even get across the Pathway Highway with the green light before it starts flashing at me. He said, there's got to be a better way. Of course, when you talk about the lights at the highway, when the fire hall is at the back, in the old days, there was a fire hall up behind the service station, Saanich Fire Hall. And they had a big red light down on the Pathway Highway that would slow motorists down, and when the trucks were going out, they'd turn the light on. But it was huge. It was probably, say that big. But the humorous part about it was that in the spring when it rained, the rain would come, wet the whole road down, and then the sun would come out. And then the reflection from the road would look as if the light was on. So people would be coming along the highway, see the red light, slam on the brakes. And we'd look up and go, okay, it's on again. And you'd hear this screeching sound, and boom, boom. It went on for about 3 weeks. My dad said, hey, you guys, because when the police came to the accident, why didn't you stop? The red light was on. No, it wasn't. But it's just a reflection from the highway with the rain. And that, to us, we thought that was quite funny, as long as we were not there. Of course, when it comes to my mother again, she was the sports director in the 60s at the Cadore Bay Hall, and of course in the major basketball tournament she always would be handling. She was also a director of softball at Lochside Park, and when she passed away, she had a ball diamond in the park named after her, and of course they still have an annual tournament, a softball tournament at Lochside Park. She was on the board of directors at the Saanich Fair, and she dressed up for birthday parties, and she dressed up for the Saanich Fair. Now, Darrell Foster knows very well how she dresses up for birthday parties. Our mutual friend and Jack's friend had a birthday party, and Darrell was the man in charge. I'm not totally sure if it was his idea entirely, but I'm pretty sure it was. He asked her if she would mind popping out of a birthday cake for Rod Stevens. Now, she did. What she did, though, was wear a black leotard and a long blonde wig. And Vern Cron made a birthday cake out of wood with wheels, decorated it up with a lid, and of course she got in it, came to the hall, Hampton Hall, got in this thing, and they wheeled it out for Rod's birthday, to sing him happy birthday. Not quite like Enid's tonight. But she popped out of this, and I don't have a picture to show you, sorry. Rod says today, so that's probably one of the best birthday parties you ever had. And it was great, right? I said she dressed up at the fair. She did. I don't know what this was all about. You dress up. It's a contest. It's probably, how can I make the most ridiculous display? I'm not sure. Her and Gladys Raper had one of these things. They kind of were in charge. The two Gladyses, as I said. That's another photo of her dressing up. She also introduced baby piglets for the very first time at the fair. Now, she'd always just used to say, kids from the city don't know what a pig looks like, or well, a little pig. And probably one of the most entertaining and popular events in the agriculture is the baby pigs. Hugh Curtis, when my mother passed away, we asked Hugh Curtis to speak at her service. And I phoned him and talked to him. He's a good friend of hers. He asked me to come over with the family, and we did. And he was sitting there talking about the old days, as you always do. And he said, I've never in my life seen people disperse than what your mother had done to the protesters picketing the fair. I mean, I've never heard anybody swear as much in my life. It was unbelievable. But the picketers were protesting the fair, something over a sewer project on Salt Spring Island. He was the MLA for the area. And my mother marched down to the gate and quickly told them to get off the grounds to the fair. This is a fair, not a forum to picket. And they left. So whatever she says, must have worked. My dad also worked with her umpiring ball games and refereeing basketball games. Before my parents died, Chuck and Gladys received the Kiwanis Award for providing youthful athletics with encouragement and opportunities throughout organized games and officiating, coaching basketball, baseball, and softball. This was awarded at the celebrity dinner held at the Empress Hotel in 1975. And that's it. Thank you. Yeah, nobody knew her, right? Yeah. You can't, as I just trying to put this stuff together, I was going crazy for the last 4 or 5 days, and then the more stuff you read, and you can't really describe her. The Saanich police said when they were actually, both of them were part of their attachments, There would, if there was somebody in a car accident living in and around Elk Lake, or somebody had died or committed suicide, whatever, they hated going to the home. They would always phone Mom at any time and say, look, you know these people? Yeah. Could you come with us? And she was really good at that. She would take over when there's a tragedy and somehow just make it float. And I don't know. They'd ask her, how can you do that? She'd, I don't know. Somebody's got to do it. No. I found a little card on all these pictures, and it looked like it was on just a piece of cardboard. Always be kind to animals. It was in her handwriting, because we just put a whole bunch of stuff together. So, there you go.